I am Miranda. I was standing in the marble lobby of the Bay Area bank, ready for a quick transaction, a simple withdrawal of $150 for a neighbor. The moment my sister Stephanie, the senior bank manager, spotted me, the silence broke. She crossed the room, smirked, and said, "We don't serve beggars here. Miranda, get out." She didn't realize that in 2 minutes I would make a request for $3.8 billion. I am a quant analyst. Last week my own sister tried to reduce me to nothing in the middle of a crowded bank lobby. All I needed was $150. One simple withdrawal. But the moment she saw me step up to that counter, everything shifted. Her eyes sharpened, her smile curled, and she decided that humiliating me would make her morning more entertaining. And for a few seconds, I stood there frozen, feeling that familiar sting I had carried since childhood, the one that always came from her direction. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm, to walk away before I gave her the satisfaction of reacting. So I did. I turned, stepped back into the lobby, and let her think she had won. What she did not know was that she had just chosen the single worst moment in her life to test me. Because while she believed she was belittling a sister with barely enough in her account to pull out $150, she had absolutely no idea who she was actually talking to, or what I had the power to move with a single request. 2 minutes later, when I made that request, the entire bank went dead silent. Drop a comment, and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. There is a reason that moment in the bank cut deeper than it should have. And it reaches back much farther than adulthood. My family was never cruel with explosions. They perfected the art of the quiet exclusion. My father, Frank, always gravitated toward loud victories, which he unfortunately only saw in my sisters. My mother, Patricia, loved the appearance of harmony more than the truth it was supposed to represent. So she amplified whatever made the family look polished from the outside. I learned early what it meant to be the daughter who blended into the corners. One memory stands out more sharply than the rest: my birthday. I had worked for days on a handmade scrapbook, trying to be seen. But when I placed it on the table, attention shifted instantly to what my sister Stephanie had given, something store-bought, shiny, and expensive. The room warmed with admiration for her, and I watched my creations sit untouched. Moments like that arrived quietly, accumulating into a steady certainty. I learned to occupy the silent space between them, never enough to warrant criticism, but never enough to earn real applause. The only person who challenged that pattern was my grandfather, Arthur. He had a way of noticing the small details most people stepped over. When he grew older, he invited me to help him review household ledgers, an act which eventually became the foundation for everything I would do later in my life. Before he passed, he gave me a plain wooden box with a brief note, asking me to keep what mattered safe. My parents assumed my sister Tiffany was helping with the household accounts once she grew older, mostly because she liked playing the part of the responsible daughter. She was the one with effortless poise, the one who could smile her way out of every flaw. But the ledgers did not care about appearances. And even then, I began noticing transfers that did not match any obligation. Small at first, almost dismissible, the kind of discrepancies someone could brush away if they wanted to avoid ruining the mood. My heart aches when I remember the feeling of knowing something was fundamentally wrong in the accounts, but being too small, too unheard to raise the alarm. I kept the findings to myself, storing each detail like a thread I was not ready to pull. I did not understand how far it would stretch, only that something was not right. Growing older did not grant me distance from the patterns I grew up with, but it did give me the clarity to move in another direction. I moved to the Bay Area to build a life shaped by something other than comparison. I started as an entry-level quant analyst, a role that required patience and long hours. I learned to identify inconsistencies faster than most. For the first time, ability mattered more than presentation, and that gave me a sense of stability I had never been offered at home. My initial silence was not a sign of weakness. It was an act of emotional triumph of survival. It was the only way to avoid the predictable explosion of their dismissal and preserve the tiny core of myself. Sometimes when you have spent years navigating abuse, psychological or emotional, your survival instinct learns that confrontation is futile. It teaches you to absorb the blow, to stay small and quiet until the danger passes. You become a hostage in a prison without bars. That is what my silence was, not weakness, but the perfected tactic of a survivor waiting for the right moment to act. Choosing integrity over obligation. That moment arrived when I saw my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn, struggling to cover the cash deposit for a heating unit repair. I told her I would take care of it. It was a practical, measured, routine errand. The bank was only a short drive away, and I walked inside with the easy assumption that the transaction would take a minute or two. But the moment I stepped into that lobby, I saw Stephanie Hart, my sister, and the senior bank manager, scanning the room as if it belonged to her. She didn't see me at first, which gave me a second to steady myself. When she finally spotted me, the look on her face shifted from irritation to the familiar judgment she never bothered to conceal. I stated my simple request for $150 plainly. Stephanie reacted as though I had asked for something outlandish. Her voice carried a certain performative sharpness, chosen specifically for the audience standing nearby. She directed her words toward the room, inviting strangers to witness the contrast she believed existed between her polished position and the sister she never took seriously. "We do not serve beggars here, Miranda," she said loudly enough to draw attention. "Perhaps you should learn the value of maintaining an actual balance before you disrupt our teller's time." The sting came from the way she framed the moment, as if my mere presence disrupted the order she worked so hard to project. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I stepped aside, letting her believe she had re-established whatever hierarchy she imagined existed between us. She returned to her station with a satisfied posture, convinced the moment was closed. I sat down on one of the waiting chairs, not out of defeat, but because I needed space to think. I opened my laptop, not caring whether anyone noticed. The familiar interface of the private investment engine Lucas and I built appeared with each keystroke. Seeing it reminded me of the life I had constructed far beyond the boundaries of moments like this. While Stephanie measured power in titles and posture, mine lived in the structure I carried with me, invisible to anyone who chose not to look deeper. Nothing dramatic happened in that instant. It was just a quiet recognition that the balance between us had never been what she believed. As I studied the data spread across my screen, the noise of the lobby faded until it became background texture, unimportant and easily filtered out. I stayed seated for a moment longer, letting the screen settle in front of me, absorbing the numbers that had become so familiar they felt almost like pulse rhythms. The system was stable, steady, and entirely under my control. I did not have to make any dramatic gestures. I only needed to initiate a routine action that carried far more weight than anyone in that lobby could imagine. I initiated a standard withdrawal request, the kind usually made between institutional partners, not individuals. The system automatically generated the notice that would be sent to the regional office of the bank's parent corporation. Nothing about the process was dramatic. It was procedural. But the number attached to the request, $3.8 billion, did not pass through channels unnoticed. I saw the first sign of disruption in the immediate response. The system flagged the receiving institution for verification, not because of error, but because the size required executive-level clearance. Seconds later, the lobby's atmosphere shifted. Employees glanced toward their monitors with expressions that did not match normal workflow. Two tellers exchanged worried looks. Stephanie, from across the room, noticed the shift before she understood it. Her posture changed as she tried to assess the situation. A familiar tension formed in her shoulders. For a woman who thrived on control, uncertainty was something she could never mask. She moved toward the nearest employee, asking a low, insistent question. I watched her eyes narrow as the answer reached her, not in detail, but in implication. Within minutes, a man in a tailored suit entered the lobby, carrying the energy of someone whose morning had been abruptly uprooted. He scanned the room with deliberate efficiency until his gaze stopped on me. Then he approached with a measured calm that contrasted sharply with the growing unease around him. He extended his hand and introduced himself as Daniel Cho, the regional director overseeing the bank's operations. It was the first time I had met him, yet the respect in his tone was unmistakable. He did not ask why I was there or question the legitimacy of the transaction. He only asked whether I preferred to speak privately. His professionalism carried the weight of someone who recognized the significance of the request I had submitted. Stephanie's reaction unfolded slowly and painfully. She looked from Daniel to me, her confusion deepening with each detail. She failed to connect. The hierarchy she understood suddenly shifted, and she struggled to place herself within the new structure. Her authority, which had felt so secure only an hour earlier, no longer anchored her. Daniel asked if I needed anything else before he stepped away to coordinate the transfer. I told him no, keeping my voice even. I did not need to raise it or emphasize anything. The transaction spoke for itself. He nodded once, acknowledging that clarity, then left the lobby to notify the corporate office. Silence filled the space he left behind. No one knew exactly what had happened, but they sensed the imbalance. Stephanie remained still, caught in an internal conflict she could not resolve quickly enough. I did not offer explanation or comfort. I simply closed my laptop, placed it in my bag, and stood. Nothing I had done was impulsive or emotional. It was an administrative decision executed through the channels built for such purposes. But in that room, surrounded by people who measured influence by title or uniform, the impact reshaped everything they believed about power and proximity. And without a single confrontation, the dynamic that once defined my place in that family began to fracture in silence. The transition from disruption to consequence happened with a steadiness that left no room for misinterpretation. After Daniel stepped out, the lobby settled into a tense hush. I remained standing, letting the weight of the moment settle exactly where it belonged. Minutes later, Daniel returned and motioned for me to follow him. He led me toward the glass-walled office that belonged to Stephanie Hart, its door still slightly ajar from her rushed movements earlier. The expression on her face had hardened into something brittle, part disbelief, part dread. She stepped aside as we entered, though her hesitation revealed how little control she felt over her own space. Daniel closed the door behind us and took a position near the desk. He carried a folder containing documentation of the transfer request along with system logs confirming the origin and scale of the transaction. He simply placed them on the desk as though handling any other matter requiring his oversight. That composure made the situation even clearer. The bank's attention had moved entirely away from Stephanie's authority and toward the person she had dismissed without a second thought. I sat calmly across from Stephanie as Daniel explained that my request had triggered the bank's highest level of internal review. The system flagged the branch for procedural risk. No need to say whose behavior caused it. Stephanie tried to speak, but her composure collapsed. Daniel outlined the compliance steps and immediate corporate investigation, beginning with management. The implication was clear. Stephanie was at the center. When he asked whether I had further concerns, I simply stated that I expected accuracy and accountability. He acknowledged it, then informed Stephanie she was being placed on administrative leave. Her face moved from shock to fear. For someone whose identity relied entirely on status, losing her title meant losing everything. Daniel ended the meeting with a respectful nod and left us alone. Stephanie stared at me, realizing her sense of power had always been fragile. I left the office without a word, feeling the clarity that arrives when long-standing patterns finally end. My phone buzzed nonstop as I reached the parking lot, panic spreading through my family. I ignored the calls until my mother pleaded for an in-person meeting. I told her to bring everyone. That evening, my parents and my sister Tiffany arrived, uneasy as they stepped into my home. After we sat at the dining table, my father asked for my explanation, expecting justification. Instead, I slid a folder toward him, documents tracing Tiffany's 2-year pattern of siphoning money from my grandfather Arthur's care fund into a fake vendor account. The evidence was undeniable. Tiffany offered excuses, but they collapsed under the facts. My mother tried to soften the truth, but it stood on its own. I spoke steadily, without anger. When the silence settled, I told them I was stepping away from the family structure that had only valued what I provided. My father urged reconsideration. My mother begged for unity. But my decision was final. I informed them future communication would go through legal channels. "You have never seen me," I said. "This family dynamic ends now." They left in stunned resignation. In the days that followed, Stephanie lost her position and Tiffany faced legal and disciplinary consequences. My parents struggled with the suddenly exposed truth. I focused instead on building something meaningful. I created the Arthur Hayes Foundation to support elderly people without family care, choosing growth over revenge. I didn't destroy Tiffany or Stephanie. I simply stepped out of their reach. There are two kinds of justice, one that punishes and one that plants seeds. I chose the second. I surrounded myself with people who value integrity, not performance. The real lesson was not about wealth, but about choosing peace over patterns and self-respect over obligation. One evening, standing in my Bay Area apartment as the sun set, I finally felt seen by myself. Thank you for listening. If my story resonated, I would love to hear what choices have shaped your own boundaries.